I am Ben. Welcome to my book corner. This is my wrap up for April of 2026, my worst reading month since I started on booktube around 3.5 years ago. So we have 4 books to talk about this month. We have 1 audio, 2 ebooks, and 1 physical. Then we'll dive into the reading stats at the end of the video. So let's just dive straight in. So first off, and our runaway leader for the month in terms of score, we have Copper Skin and Oaken Lungs by Adam Basset. This came out back in February, and I almost picked it up back then because I was very excited. There was a lot of really, really positive, and as it turned out, in my opinion, deserved hype around this one within the indie community. So this is a dystopian fantasy centered around a village that has been sort of cut off from the rest of the world by what I'm going to describe as death fog, although that's not entirely true, but that's the best way I can describe it here. And you've got this regressive society that is dealing with their space being slowly constrained as over time the fog has sort of pushed in on this village, and as resources have become scarce, so things like gunpowder and stuff like that, which they can't make anymore, is rationed and only used in emergency circumstances. And you have this almost, I'd say, feudal system, but in a microcosm where you have a mayor who's in charge, and almost like a caste system of where people have been given certain jobs based on their aptitudes and their interests a little bit, all for the good of the community. And this village has been cut off for 1,000 years, so you do have a gradual dystopian regression of technology levels, although you do have an interesting mixing here of science and technology, where you do have your kind of artificer style approach to technology and trinkets and gadgets and being used as ways to try and keep the fog, for want of a better word, at bay. But you do have a recognition that magic is real in the world, although there is no practicing mage in the town at the moment. And mages tend not to end very, very well. And you're following a main character as they sort of are kind of pushing the boundaries and sort of very much burdened with curiosity. And they're sort of the person who they're in line to take over from passes away. And you have a number of time jumps as you see almost like a miniature famine sort of breaking down due to bad crop yield, stuff like that. And you then begin to get the breakdown of society as people, when people are hungry, people want food. And the blame games start going, and you start to get sort of violent insurrectionist types, which forces our main character to flee into the one place that they shouldn't go. The world building hidden here is absolutely top notch. Considering this is under 300 pages, this does a lot of heavy lifting, and it builds a real sense of mystery for the world, because this is a 1,000-year-old regressive society. A lot of stuff is word of mouth, or the characters haven't necessarily seen these things, and the focus is very much on survival ahead of a culture of learning. And that backs up against our main characters' sort of proclivities to push the boundaries and investigate things and want to know how things work. And then you start to get more and more revelations that maybe this sort of mist fog is not exactly what people expect it to be, and probably doesn't do exactly what people think it does. But also the melding of technology and magic, which are very much seen as two separate things here. But there's some interesting interplay there which suggests that at some point these two things worked in tandem, and I'm really excited to see where this series now goes. The series is called Copper and Ash. I'm not sure when book 2 is due out, but I will be picking that one up on release. I gave this an easy 5 stars out of 5, and this is by some distance my book of the month. Next up is the audiobook for the month. This is book 1 in the Dance with My Demons series by Steph Macca, and it is Unhinged, which is narrated by Anthony Palmini, Corvin King, Joe Arden, and Mary Hawkins. And I gave this 3.25 stars. It's fine. This is a book that is not aimed at me, and I think if you like dark romance, you'll probably vibe with this a lot more than I did. Again, I've listened to this really for the narration. I think the narrators once again do an amazing job Obviously, I've already spoken about Corbin King and Joe Arden this year already with Painter's Obsession. They're very, very, very good at what they do. And this is the sort of book that I personally feel is better to be listened to than read. It really does suit itself to a cast audio performance, as many of these books often do. We follow a couple of the characters in here from their point of view. Our main character, however, has just been sent to Lilydale Foundation Centre, which is the home for second chances, as it says in the description. Basically, she has caused the death of her father through arson and has managed to, rather than be sent to prison, be given the relatively exclusive spot at this foundation centre. And while she is not particularly believing in the ethics of this centre, she doesn't think it's really a thing. She feels it's more of a front for either embezzling money or for sort of political goodwill. It is at least better than prison. However, things on the surface at least appear to be legit, but there is certainly something going on underneath. We get little sprinklings of world building and information about what's really going on as we work through. The characters are decent. Again, the real strength of this is in the performance more than anything else. Our male-female character at times I felt incredibly irritated by, which is unusual in things like this, but they sort of flip-flopped quite a bit. Now, you can put that down to the situation they're finding themselves in and everything that they've been through, but there's just a couple of bits here that just didn't quite line up for me anyway. But realistically, people don't listen to these for the plot, and that's fine. My biggest issue with this is this describes itself as a why choose romance, and whilst that may be true over the series as a whole, it's not really the case in this one, where there is a clear preference and then a moment of weakness which has repercussions. This does end on a fairly deep cliffhanger at the end as well. I don't feel invested enough in the characters to continue with this, but I will say once again, the audio production of this is spectacularly good and is worth checking out just for that. 3.25 stars out of 5, but if you do like dark romance, then you'll probably have a good time with this one. We have another indie book up next, Cryosurge by E.P. Soulless. This came out in May 25, and I'm not sure how I feel about this one. I wanted to like this a lot more than I ended up doing so. First off, the artwork on the cover is absolutely phenomenal. I just want to highlight the artist here, Zane Hessness. I may have pronounced that wrong, I apologise. But this artwork is why I added this to my wish list in the first place. And then it went in the Narrates Indie sale, so why not? So this describes itself as a sci-fi. I think it's more of a fantasy, personally, a grimdark fantasy specifically, although there are a couple of elements in there that you could argue lean towards sci-fi. And this is set on a world where the gods just don't care at all, remotely. They just don't care. Indifference, but interfering is kind of the thing for the day from here. You have two main characters. The first one is called Id, a disgraced frost shaman who's blackmailed into a monster hunt. And then you have Korth, a mercenary who has been through a lot of stuff. And at this point, by the end of the book, just carves a bloody path for the realm looking for justice. And unfortunately, it's the characters that fall a little bit flat in here for me. There's nothing inherently wrong with either of them. By describing them as disgraced is kind of an unfair description in many ways. Their father was the greatest frost shaman pretty much of all time, and whilst they are probably the greatest frost shaman of their generation, it can never live up to that legend. And so you have that playing in and various other things that have happened. And while his character is interestingly enough someone who just refuses to deal with their own burdens and sort of runs away from society and only interacts when they have to, something just didn't land for me, and I'm not quite sure what it is. On the flip side of the coin, you have Korth, and you have a really interesting series of events early on that sets them on their character journey into this incredibly brutal, visceral, violent search for justice. And you see this character who, you know, was kind of more worried about their bloodlust at the beginning to very much fully embracing it by the end. It's an interesting character journey for them to take. But something just feels like it's missing with both of these characters. And it might be because you do have little time jumps in here. And at times the jump in character actions and behaviours feels a bit too big because you're missing the intervening tissue that sort of connects the 2 points. Overall, it does work, but it gives a slight level of jank to the progression there. The world itself, though, is fascinating. This is a world full of brutality and consequence. You clearly have a magic system here, although it's not overly explained, as we only see bits of it. There are various political factions at play. You have the gods that don't care, unless they actually do. You have possessed weapons, which is one of the things that I love in books like this that kind of have a life of their own. You have manipulation, you have political intrigue. The world itself is absolutely fascinating. This is a case where everything in here is at worst solid, but it just doesn't quite hang right. I do really appreciate the ending though, where you have the ultimate face-off between these two characters, who kind of were always destined, although whether they were meant to be is another question, to meet. And the after effects of that will feel like they do a really good job of setting up the second book. I just wish I liked this more than I did. It's very well written as well. It does sometimes wander itself into dead ends, but that's often the case where you have such a focus on the character journeys. The time jumps just made me lose it a little bit at times. Overall, not a bad book. Not going to be one for everybody, though. I gave this a 3.5 stars out of 5. Finally, that brings us to Escape from the Billings Mall, a select-your-own timeline adventure from Chuck Tingle. I believe this was Chuck's first choose-your-own adventure book. This released back in 2020. This is the second of his books that I have done. And I actually kind of preferred this one to the other one. Now, this is a kind of horror sci-fi focus where it's your son's birthday, you've left it to the last minute, and you're racing to the mall, to the shopping centre, to pick up a last-minute gift just before it closes. But some sort of tear in the space-time continuum has happened, and things go off the rails quickly. I did this once again as a live stream. It was a lot of fun to work through. I do really appreciate a mechanic that's built into here, which I don't think I've seen before, because one of the things with choose your own adventure books quite often is you get to a certain point and then you die and then you just have to start again. And whilst you have a similar thing here, you kind of have roadblocks in here where you can't progress. It has an in-story meta commentary going on, which allows you to go back to the beginning for story reasons, referring to it as a time loop that you're stuck in until you find a way through. And it's such a minor thing that I really, really like. There's some interesting imagery in here, which actually feels like a precursor to some of the stuff in Chuck's other horror books, which I really appreciated. It's good to see the initial seeds of things here. The body horror in here, whilst it is not too graphic, has a level of creep to it that I really appreciate. And I just like the general sort of vibe of Chuck Tingle's work in general. I've said this before, the whole love is real aspect of things, I really, really appreciate. That actually, as always, plays into the solution to what you're going through as the main character here. And this was just a lot of fun. I will probably continue with the Choose Your Own Adventure timelines from Chuck, although they will not be streamed. But I thought this was a lot of fun. I gave this a 3.75 stars out of 5. Pretty short. It did take us a couple of hours to get through, though, on stream, which surprised me. But this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed this quite a bit. So that brings us to the wrap up. So we've only read 4 books this month, which is less than normal. 832 pages, which is about half what I normally read, and just under 6 hours of audio, with an average rating of 3.88 and an average book length of 241 pages. And as you can see, my reading month has been best described as flat. It has not been a good month at all. In terms of breakdown, you can see it's all here. Not really much to say. Horror, romance, fantasy, speculative fiction, and YA. Yeah, not really much to say about the month in general. It was a poor month for reading, although we have done other things as well. In terms of my reading challenge year to date, then, I'm recording this on the 1st, so this is pretty much up to date. I'm on 23 out of my target of 52 books, so in that regard, I'm doing pretty well. I'm 6 books ahead right now. I'm only on 5,180 pages, which puts me just under 300 pages behind right now, but that's easily caught up if I have a decent month. And I'm around 9 hours behind on my audio. As said previously, April was a really poor month for reading, and to be honest, March was not particularly great either. So, there we go. That is my reading wrap up for April of 2026. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all soon.